The neon-soaked streets of Chicago don't whisper. They scream in a dialect of screeching tires and heavy-caliber percussion. When I set out to infiltrate the upper echelons of the outfit of the criminal organization that Al Capone built on a foundation of illicit booze and tax evasion, I expected a high-octane odyssey of back handshakes and high-speed chases. I was prepared for the gritty reality of the underworld, the scent of expensive cigars, the cold weight of a piece tucked into my waistband, and the constant electric hum of impending doom. I had my leather jacket, my scowl, and a carefully curated air of "don't ask me about my mother." My mission was extreme: to live the life of a modern-day mobster, a shadow in the windy city, a ghost in the machine of organized crime. I wanted to see the danger, feel the heat of the law on my neck, and witness the clandestine power plays that move millions of dollars in the dark. I was ready to dance with the devil in the pale moonlight, or at least in a dimly lit basement in Cicero. I had envisioned a week of high-stakes gambling, narrow escapes from rival syndicates, and perhaps a glamorous, if slightly lethal, encounter with a femme fatale who knew too much and wore too little. But the reality of the Chicago mob, as it turns out, is less good and more introverts anonymous with occasionally better suits. The first thing you learn about being a high-level enforcer is that the most dangerous weapon in your arsenal isn't a Tommy gun. It's a pair of noise-canceling headphones. My initiation didn't happen in a blood-stained warehouse. It happened in a quiet, suspiciously clean deli where the most aggressive act was someone putting too much mustard on a rye. My mentor, a man named Paulie the Processor, didn't have a scar across his eye. He had a standing desk and a very specific way of organizing his Google Calendar. He told me that the modern mobster is a master of the bait and switch. We lure the world into thinking we're out here conducting midnight raids, but in reality, we are the ultimate multitaskers of the mundane. Science actually backs this up. The prefrontal cortex of an introvert in a high-stressed environment, or a mobster trying to decide which legitimate dry cleaner needs a visitor's constantly overstimulated. We aren't being quiet because we're plotting your demise. We're being quiet because our brains are currently processing 52 different streams of sensory data, and if one more person asks me if I want a cannoli, I will biologically shut down. My first dangerous assignment involved a high-speed pursuit, but not the kind involving sirens. It was a race against the biological clock of my own social battery. I was tasked with monitoring a situation at a local social club. This sounded promising. I expected smoke-filled rooms and whispered betrayals. Instead, I found a room full of men sitting in silence, deeply engaged in their own phones, occasionally nodding at each other in a way that signaled, "I acknowledge your existence. Please do not perceive me." It turns out the modern gangster is the peak of introverted evolution. We have to be in the world of illegal substances, and by that, I mean the sheer amount of high-fructose corn syrup and ibuprofen these guys consume to manage their chronic back pain from sitting menacingly. You can't afford to be a social butterfly. If you talk too much, you're a liability. If you're too loud, you're a target. The neurobiology of the introvert is perfectly suited for the mob because our reward system is triggered differently. While an extrovert gets a hit of dopamine from social interaction and the scene, a Chicago mobster gets his dopamine from a perfectly executed Excel spreadsheet that hides the waste management fees. The women of the mob were equally terrifying, but not for the reasons I thought. There were no fishnets or snub-nosed revolvers and garters. There was, however, Mrs. Gambino, woman who could make a grown man weep simply by staring at him until he admitted he hadn't reached his hydration goals for the day. She was the true dawn of the domestic sphere, a multitasker who could cook a 7-course meal, track 3 different offshore accounts, and shame a hitman for his poor posture simultaneously. This is where the scientific evidence of heavy multitasking comes into play. Research shows that switching between tasks actually decreases productivity by 40%. But Mrs. Gambino seemed to operate in a state of flow that defied the laws of cognitive psychology. She lived in a constant state of 18 content, meaning she was perpetually 18 minutes away from a total nervous breakdown. Yet she remained the calmest person in the room. Watching her was like watching a high-stakes bomb disposal unit. If the bomb was made of lasagna and unfiled tax returns, I spent 3 hours helping her move some weight, which turned out to be boxes of vintage Christmas decorations that she intended to sell on Etsy to clean the money she'd saved from her grocery budget. It was a near-death situation. I almost died of boredom while she explained the difference between a 1960s glass ornament and a modern plastic imitation. By day 3, the psychological momentum was building. I was deep in the underwhelming reality. I found myself sitting in a parked car for 6 hours, not waiting for a drop-off, but because my associate needed to finish a podcast about the Roman Empire before he could face the social pressure of ordering a sandwich. The illegal substances turned out to be a very specific brand of unpasteurized cheese smuggled in from Wisconsin, which apparently carries a heavier federal penalty than some small arms charges if you get caught by the wrong health inspector. We sat there, 2 tough guys in a blacked-out SUV, meticulously analyzing the gut health benefits of probiotics. It was a masterclass in the introverted mind. We weren't being stoic. We were just deeply invested in our internal monologues, Science tells us that introverts have a higher level of electrical activity in their brains, meaning we are constantly on even when we look off. In the mob, this looks like a cold, calculating gaze. In reality, I was just trying to remember if I left the stove on, or if I'd accidentally liked a photo of my ex from 2014 while doom scrolling earlier that morning. The tension was palpable. Every time a squirrel ran across the road, my partner would flinch. Not because he thought it was a rival gang member, but because the sudden movement disrupted his mental Zen garden. This was the life. This was the Chicago outfit. A group of highly organized, deeply tired individuals who just wanted to go home and read a book about military history. As we rolled into the latter half of the week, the psychological weight of the underwhelming reality began to manifest as a literal tension in my jaw. I had expected the life of a Chicago mobster to be a relentless sequence of adrenaline-pumping highlights. But I discovered that being an elite criminal multitasker is mostly just the art of managing extreme levels of passive-aggressive silence. We spent 4 hours casing a high-end jewelry store, which, in the world of the introverted mob, actually meant sitting in a parked sedan 2 blocks away while my associate, Tony Two Phones, meticulously compared the specs of different air purifiers on his devices. The scientific reality of the multitasker's brain is that it's not actually doing 2 things at once. It's rapidly switching focus, creating a switching cost that leaves you feeling like your soul has been put through a paper shredder. My brain was firing off signals like a malfunctioning switchboard. One part of me was scanning for undercover feds. Another was wondering if I'd developed a gluten sensitivity. And a third was deeply concerned about the structural integrity of my favorite pair of socks. This is the bait and switch of the criminal lifestyle. The world sees a menacing figure in a tinted window, but the interior reality is a man debating whether he has enough social energy left to handle a drive-through window. The dangerous situations escalated when I was invited to a sit-down at a secluded warehouse on the outskirts of the city. My heart was hammered against my ribs. This was it, the classic cinematic showdown. I expected a circle of chairs, a single hanging light bulb, and a heavy-set man named Big Sal questioning my loyalty. Instead, I walked into a brightly lit break room where 6 men were sitting in profound silence, each focused intensely on their own individual tasks. One was knitting a very intricate scarf. Another was solving a 5,000-piece jigsaw puzzle of a serene mountain landscape. They weren't ignoring me. They were just deep in the introvert's sanctuary, a psychological state where the outside world ceases to exist so the internal processor can catch up. The 18 content of this gathering was the sheer intensity of the eye contact, or rather, the lack of it. We sat for 3 hours in a state of collective, focused solitude. The only sound was the occasional click of a puzzle piece or the soft clucking of a tongue when someone dropped a stitch. It was a near-death experience for my extroverted ego. I felt the overwhelming urge to crack a joke, to break the tension, to say anything, but I knew that in this circle, a sudden loud noise was considered a declaration of war. Science explains that introverts have a thicker prefrontal cortex, which is associated with deep thought and planning. This makes them excellent at the long game of organized crime, but it also means they are biologically incapable of enjoying a surprise party. During this mission, I realized that the mob isn't built on violence. It's built on the avoidance of unnecessary stimuli. Every hit is carefully calculated to minimize social interaction. Every heist is planned to ensure the least amount of small talk possible. We weren't thugs. We were highly specialized project managers with a very low tolerance for background noise. My illegal substance intake reached a peak when I was forced to consume a special blend of herbal tea that Polly claimed helped with cognitive load management. It tasted like boiled lawn clippings and existential dread. But I drank it with the solemnity of a man taking a blood oath. I was becoming one of them. I was beginning to see the beauty in the silence, the power in the unwavering boundary lines that my own brain was drawing around my personal space. I was no longer a man pretending to be a mobster. I was an introvert who had finally found his tribe, even if that tribe happened to be involved in the unlicensed distribution of high-end espresso machines. Then came the anticlimax, the moment where the grand narrative of my criminal career came crashing down into the mundane. On my final night, I was told there was one last job, a cleanup that required absolute discretion. I prepared for the worst. I imagined disposing of evidence, wiping down a crime scene, or perhaps a midnight run to the docks. We drove to a quiet suburban street, the engine of the Cadillac purring like a caffeinated panther. We pulled up to a modest brick house. Paulie handed me a pair of rubber gloves and a heavy-duty trash bag. "This is it," he whispered, his voice thick with unearned gravity. We walked into the garage, and there it was, the ultimate testament to the mob's secret life. Not a body, not a stash of diamonds. It was a mountain of uncollapsed cardboard boxes. "Mrs. Gambino's son moved out 3 months ago," Paulie explained, his eyes darting around the quiet neighborhood. "She needs these gone before the It's a high-stakes environment, kid. One wrong move and the fines start rolling in." I spent the next 4 hours meticulously breaking down Amazon boxes, a task that required the kind of repetitive, focused energy that an introverted multitasker thrives on. I was processing logistics, liquidating assets, and managing waste, all while maintaining a look of intense, brooding focus. This was the life. This was the big mistake. I had come looking for the Godfather, but I found a group of guys who were just really stressed about their recycling bins. The danger was the threat of a paper cut. The women were concerned neighbors with binoculars, and the high-speed chase was me trying to beat the garbage truck to the curb. As I stood there in the pre-dawn light, covered in cardboard dust and holding a roll of packing tape like a scepter, I realized the true secret of the Chicago outfit. They aren't hiding from the law. They're hiding from the exhaustion of modern life. They've created a shadow world where they can be quiet, organized, and deeply involved in their own niche hobbies without anyone asking them to hop on a quick Zoom call. My week as a mobster ended not with a bang, but with the satisfying thud of a neatly folded box hitting the bottom of a bin. I walked away from the neon streets, not as a hardened criminal, but as a man who desperately needed a nap and a very long, very silent shower.